Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Families Together's sixth and final town hall for 2023's legislative session. The town halls, as many of you know, have been a huge success in giving us the opportunity for commissioners, deputy commissioners, legislators, chairs of the various committees to address families and young people with lived experience in their specific area. So this is our final one today. And then we have on Tuesday, our Family Empowerment Day, which is going to be the first time in person since 2020. We're looking forward to seeing lots of people. We have hundreds of people coming to the Legislative Office Building in Albany on Tuesday, the 21st. So we encourage everyone to register for that if they are able to come. And this, as well as all the other town halls, have been recorded and will be on our website. It's my pleasure today. I'm Paige Pierce, CEO of Families Together, and it's my pleasure to have the senator who's the chair of the Education Committee, Senator Mayer, and also Assistant Commissioner Kathleen DeCataldo from the State Education Department. And then we're going to turn it over to the panelists. So if I could just have the senator introduce herself.
Sure, and thank you for having me. I'm State Senator Shelley Mayer from the 37th Senate District, which goes from Yonkers to northern Westchester, but I am honored to be the chair of the Senate Education Committee and thereby care about kids in every part of the state. So thank you for having me. I look forward to listening and being as helpful as I possibly can.
Thank you, Senator. Assistant Commissioner DeCataldo.
Good afternoon. I'm so pleased to be here to give you greetings on behalf of our State Education Commissioner, Betty Rosa, who regrets not being able to join us this year as she has the last few years. I oversee the Office of Student Support Services, and we work to promote school improvement, better outcomes for students by focusing on the whole child, including areas such as the Dignity for All Students Act, student-centered support services, student health and wellness, expanded learning opportunities, social emotional learning, school climate, safety, discipline, and alternative education, including the education of youth and juvenile justice facilities and foster care. I also oversee the Office of Child Nutrition, which provides oversight of the federal national school lunch and school breakfast programs, summer food service programs, and numerous state-level child nutrition programs. And I'm just really pleased to be here with all of you again this year and look forward to our conversation.
Thanks, Kathleen, and thanks again for being here with us. Our moderator today is Shoshana Horowitz, and she's going to introduce all the rest of the panelists. Shoshana?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us, Senator Mayer and Assistant Commissioner DeCataldo. My name is Shoshana Hershkowitz. I'm the statewide organizer for education and childcare at Citizen Action of New York. And education is an issue that's really dear to my heart. I began my career in K through 12 public education. I spent 10 years teaching in a suburban high school in Suffolk County. I am an adjunct over at Stony Brook University. I've been there for 14 years. I still work there a couple of times a week. In addition to my responsibilities at Citizen Action, I've been a supervisor of student teachers in their field placement on Long Island. And I'm also a parent. And I'm going to kick off with my question before we move to our other panelists. I am the parent of two children, one of whom has a 504 plan. And my question is, knowing that suspensions and exclusionary discipline specifically targets and disproportionately impacts children with learning disabilities, developmental disabilities, as well as children who are Black, Brown, and LGBTQ+. I'd like to know how we can make sure that every child has the type of behavioral supports my own child's school has. We're very fortunate in my child's school, the one with the 504 plan, there's a school psychologist on the premises, there's multiple social workers, we have PBIS supports in place, but we know that that's not the case in every school across New York State. And we, in a recent, I think it was January 2023, this NYSED put out the report basically saying that when it came to exclusionary discipline, local control was no longer adequate. And we are proponents of the Solutions, Not Suspensions Act because it would reduce suspensions greatly across New York State, making sure that kids in grades K through 3 are largely not suspended. And at the older levels, we're reducing suspensions from 180 days, which is a whole school year, down to 20 for only the most serious infractions, as well as putting in these behavioral supports. So my question is, how can we ensure that every child across New York State in the 700 districts has access to the same behavioral supports and resources that my own child does, so that we can ensure their success?
Well, I guess I'll jump in and go first. And thank you for the question. And thank you for reflecting that some districts actually do well with these challenges. Other districts do less well. And our job is to sort of have uniformity so that it doesn't matter what district the child lives in, that the standards are the right ones and they are uniform. So as you know, this bill has been around for a good many years, pre-COVID, and then during COVID. There's been a lot of activism, credit to the activists for really pushing hard on this. And there's a lot of stakeholders in the school space, superintendents, yes, teachers, yes, administrators, parents, the traditional PTAs. It really runs the gamut. That being said, this year, working with Senator Jackson, who's the prime sponsor in the Senate, we have concluded that the best thing to do right now, because the world has changed a little during COVID, in terms of schools, and actually discipline over those years has changed a little bit. It's been a mixed bag, I think. We're going to have 2 public hearings, one in Albany, one in New York, on this bill from the Senate, with an opportunity to hear parents, those who are directly impacted, maybe those like you, Shoshana, who have a good experience to tell, and those many parents and activists that we've heard from, including young people that I've heard from over the years, who have been suspended or expelled and whose lives, changed and yet came to tell their story. So I'm hopeful that with having 2 hearings, we move towards some resolution to get a bill that can pass both houses. So I don't have the dates yet, and I know my education committee director is here and she'll maybe write me. I don't believe the dates have been set, but we intend to have 2 public hearings, in-person hearings, one in New York City and Manhattan, one in Albany in the Legislative Office Building. Right now, as you know, we're in the middle of the budget. We have another few weeks to get to the end. We've done a lot of good things for schools and students that should not be forgotten in this budget and in our one-house budgets, but we need to address this issue. And I look forward to the hearings to be able to hear and then try to find a path forward.
So my turn. Thank you for this question regarding school discipline. So the report that you referenced is our Safe Schools Task Force report and recommendations that was released after about 18 months of study of the issue with some national experts from Child Trends. It reflects looking at discipline data, both reported to the Federal Department of Education as well as data that has been reported to the State Education Department. And it concludes with a series of recommendations to really ask for a paradigm shift in schools across the state. And because the data revealed that there's been very little change despite a lot of focus since 2012 in discipline data, and certainly in the disparities that we see in the data. And so the paradigm shift is really from a reactive system that punishes and pushes students away to one that's proactive and seeks to build student supports and skills so they can stay in the classroom and learn. And we really tried very hard in that report to say that that type of shift requires time and investment in staff and real work in schools so that all educators have the skills to respond to student challenging behaviors. Our report didn't endorse any particular legislation, but it did recommend changes to the current language of our education law, which I think anyone who's ever read it agrees that it's very punitive in its framework, and has a number of areas where reform is really needed. At SED, we're working on tools to help schools examine their practices, including a data toolkit, which will include tools and strategies for reducing the use of exclusionary practices, and also a code of conduct self-assessment tool. We're also going to be releasing 2 RFPs with funding from the legislature, and thank you, Senator Mayer. And those are intended to help improve school climate by supporting programs to reduce suspensions through implementation of alternatives to discipline, like restorative practices, therapeutic crisis intervention, staff training on alternative discipline, trauma-informed education, and de-escalation techniques. And we know that even more than that is necessary. But honestly, with the return to in-person learning, the department has continued to advocate for schools to respond thoughtfully and with compassion to student behavior, recognizing that students and staff have undergone trauma and loss. And we've all watched with fear and dismay relentless acts of violence, increasing rates of anxiety, suicide, depression, tempers boiling over, and anger in our communities and our schools. And I think, you know, for us at SED, we see that the relationships that are at the core of what's going on in schools and students being able to learn have really frayed, and that we need to take the time to restore those relationships, because students won't be ready to learn until they feel safe and welcomed in their schools. So we look forward to working with our schools and with all of you to better support our students so that they can realize their dreams.
Thank you so much for those answers. Really, very much appreciated. I look forward to those public hearings. And I really do agree with you as an educator, even back in the collegiate classroom, our kids have undergone, from the littlest all the way up, have undergone some real trauma, and we have a lot of healing and work to do together. I will say one quick thing before I pass to our next panelist, and that is that in the last 3 years that I taught in a high school, I was also in the discipline office as a dean. And I will tell you that the best experiences I had were the ones where I got to work in restorative means as opposed to punitive ones. I think we got better results from our students, and we built better relationships and less recidivism. So I look forward to creating positive changes in our schools. I know they work. I'm going to pass it over to Brian now for his question.
Hello. So my name is Brian Lembrowski, and I'm the parent of 2 children ages 5 and 8, both diagnosed with ADHD, who attend a citywide gifted and talented school in New York City. We've been very fortunate to find a school that has been able to meet their mental health needs. But we're also aware of many other families who haven't been so lucky. Their kids attend public schools who are unable or unwilling to meet their children's mental health needs, and unable to find those mental health supports in the community, turn to or are pushed to turn to a range of non-public school options, usually at great expense to their local school districts. The Department of Education has $50 million for school-based mental health services that has been slow to roll out. To your knowledge, what does mental health support currently look like in schools? And does it include children and family treatment support services, which was the new Medicaid state plan service that was implemented over the last few years? And what support for local school districts to meet students' mental health needs can the state provide?
Why don't you go first?
I was going to say that sounds like a state ed first.
Yeah, mostly state ed.
So first of all, it's a patchwork. It is different in all of our school districts, in our charter schools, and in our non-public schools, for sure. First, to talk about the RECOVS grant, the New York State Recover from COVID School Program. So that's a 2-year, $100 million grant program to address both mental health and learning loss from the trauma of the pandemic. And schools and school districts and BOCES can choose to apply for either one. I want to be very clear, though, that it requires 100% match for every dollar that's applied for. So local dollars, 100% have to match the money that's going out. And, you know, I don't have a lot of excuses. I'll just say that, you know, getting an RFP, approved by the executive office, not a budget, and the division of budget is a time-consuming process. We've just received our 4th or 5th round of comments and edits, and we're working to incorporate them. We hope to have the RFP out the door in early spring. But we're doing a lot, and as much as we can right now. We're working in collaboration with the Office of Mental Health to develop guidance, including a toolkit to help districts build the fundamental elements of a comprehensive mental health system. We advocate for the use of an evidence-based multi-tiered system of support to assist students who are struggling with academic and emotional issues. And those supports look different in each school. But we also always emphasize with schools that they need to partner with their community providers. For example, work with their local Department of Mental Health to establish a school mental health clinic. And that's one of the areas we're working closely with the Office of Mental Health on. Work with family engagement specialists, peer advocate programs, train their faculty and staff in youth mental health first aid, and also work with the Mental Health Consortium, which is one of the things that we're really talking about for our rural communities that struggle so much to access mental health resources. I also want to point to a universal tier 1 intervention, social emotional learning, which is a process through which students acquire and apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, and establish and maintain positive relationships and make responsible decisions. My office recently released an equity-based social emotional learning benchmarks, updated benchmarks that includes a section or begins with a section for adults and educators, because if we're not modeling those skills, then our students aren't going to be able to learn them. Also, schools are required through education law, section 804, to educate students about mental health as part of health education. And the Mahaney School Mental Health Resource and Training Center, again, funded by the legislature, provides great resources for schools and families, including training in youth mental health first aid. Your question specifically asked about children and family treatment and support services, which is now covered by Medicaid. These schools are not direct providers of services under CFTSS.
Correct.
But we are recommending that schools work collaboratively with those community providers to coordinate in-school support, planning, and services. And CFTSS service providers will often provide services directly in a school setting. But of course, not all students are eligible for Medicaid services. So one of the important proposals that is before the legislature this session is to require private insurance companies to pay at the Medicaid rate for student mental health services. That will greatly increase access and help those mental health clinics and schools to actually be able to sustain services. We plan to continue to collaborate with OMH and our partners at the Department of Health and the Office of Children and Family Services to find every opportunity to streamline access to supportive services in schools, because we know how much those are needed.
Thank you. I'll jump in much with less detail, Brian, but thank you for bringing this to the fore. Well, one thing I want to say is prior to COVID, I went around the state and met with stakeholders in everywhere, including the cities and suburban and rural communities. And at that time, superintendents said their number one issue was mental health. That was pre-COVID. And I fought to get in the budget $10 million for school mental health, which I think is just barely getting out the door. That was from 2019 budget, 2019, 2020, showing you to Kathleen's point, the frustration with fighting for this money and not getting it out the door. And I feel that way about the Recovs program, and not pointing any fingers, but it's not acceptable that last year we allocated this money and we're still in the process of trying to come up with acceptable RFPs between SED and DOB. And that's no one's problem on this phone except for really, us in the legislature who fight for it and need to make sure that these programs exist in the real world. So we want it out there. One of my problems with the Recovs is, one, it's a competitive grant, and two, as Kathleen said, it requires 100% match. And those two things disqualify a lot of districts, including districts in my district that are not deemed. I have some very needy districts and I have some less needy districts. The less needy districts are not eligible because this is really directed at high need districts. And the other thing is the more needy districts can't make the 100% match. So very challenging to make this work. And I'd like to fight for less of this competitive fighting against each other for these resources, and then recognizing that every school needs this range of support, particularly post-COVID. The second thing I want to say, and then Kathleen, you really did a great job of explaining the detail, is we've seen creative superintendents and principals come up with from the ground up efforts that work well. And I'm not a fan of all good ideas come from Albany. They don't. You're in a school, you know, when you go in a school, a superintendent or a principal that makes that place work well for every child, including those who have mental health needs. In my district, I've seen with the American Rescue Plan money that some districts have used creative relationships with community-based providers for kids who simply really need a consultative relationship to speak to, and they don't have that kind of person in the school's employ. So they direct them through this community-based providers, which is been an effective mechanism. I don't know whether they can keep it up after they run out of the money, but I think we ought to collect some of these good ideas from the ground up in New York City schools particularly, and elsewhere, where superintendents and principals are figuring out what really works for their students. And we try to replicate some of that. So that's the second thing. Third thing I want to say is, although it's not directly responsive to your question, Brian, in our one house budget in the Senate, we added 105 million for community schools statewide to have a wraparound services. The whole point is that, you know, they're not all perfect, but the concept of having a wraparound service for both students and families for the vast majority of our districts has proved to be a winning strategy. And we want to see more of it, not less of it. I think COVID made clear the school has a much broader mission than just this, 8 to 2:30 role. That's out the corner. I would also add, just because I came from it, we also added universal school meals in our one house budget, as did the Assembly. And we're going to fight to get that at the end. And SED has been very supportive of that. But the school has a bigger role, and you've identified, Brian, something that we need to continue to focus on. And I think in our house, particularly with the leadership of Senator Mannion, who is chair of our disabilities committee, we are trying to make sure that that's infused in our conversation. Shouldn't be on the side or an extra or an add-on. So the points you've made are very real, and hopefully we can translate this recovs and the other money into meaningful money that makes a difference.
If I can just add a plea, Senator. So in our Safe Schools Task Force report, one of the things we talk about is permanent directed funding to support social workers, school counselors, and these supportive services in schools. Because one of the things that's so disheartening is whenever there's an economic downturn, the first people to go are the people that are the social workers, school counselors, or those people who are supporting alternatives to discipline in school. So that would be wonderful.
You're on mute, Senator.
Sorry. Yes, please share your specific ideas of good ideas so we can replicate that. And to the point Kathleen made, I am from the city of Yonkers. Because of the ARP money, they were able to hire 250 psychologists and social workers, all of whom had been laid off in prior iterations of starvation diet budgets. So to your point, those things are absolutely essential. We can't sort of have them as add-ons. So of course, we're worried when the money stops, but we would like to see permanently these range of support services in every school.
Thank you so much. And I have heard wonderful things about what's going on in Yonkers. So I think that's a great model of something that's working really well. I want to turn it over to Rebecca for the next question.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Umar Bashar, and I'm a youth peer advocate. I have a lot of experience with how mental health can impact the quality of education that a child receives. In my experience, I did not receive the educational support or mental health support that I should have from my school. At the time, I often lacked confidence to advocate for what I needed. As a youth peer advocate now, I see how YPAs can help youth advocate for themselves and offer quality mental health support. The presence of youth peer advocates in school settings would greatly improve outcomes for young people like me. We see the need to break the stigma and help young people feel safe to ask for help, and we can obviously see how peers make this easier to do. How will the state commit to building mutual support networks for students? And how can youth peer advocates fit into the larger strategy to help drive youth-led conversations around mental health?
So, Senator.
Well, I actually don't know the answer, Rebecca, and I think it's a very good question. The question is, one of the questions is not always about money, so I don't want to say it's only about money, but to fund a youth peer advocate is someone who should get paid for their work in order to be invested in making it work. And I know, so yes, you say there, there are probably examples, and you may know some, Rebecca, that we should replicate. And I'm very interested as we move ahead in seeing how we can place those folks in schools or in the educational setting. So I don't know the answer to your question, how the state can do it. I think we do know the answer. Okay, Paige, there you go. I guess there's an answer which I did not know.
And I'll just jump on and say we agree completely. And with the shortage of mental health professionals across the state, we need to be creative about providing supports in schools for our students. And frankly, as a recent national survey revealed, and as most adults paying attention know, kids would much rather talk to each other than to us. So how do we capitalize on that? So youth peer support services are instrumental in helping to do that. We're currently working with OMH to increase access to trained peer supports in schools. It will be a permitted activity in the forthcoming Recov's RFP as well, but don't tell anybody I said that. We also featured Robbie Lettieri and his work with the Highland High School and the Junior Peer Advocate Training Program at the Fall New York State School Boards Association Annual Conference, because we were just so excited about having this training and teaching, high school students to provide these types of supports to each other in schools. Kids always step up when they see a need. They always want to help their peers. It's just such a wonderful program. So we are, we're doing whatever we can to support rolling this out more and more. We're also looking at providing in our nation schools. So working with some of the indigenous nations to provide a training curriculum that is culturally responsive, and then work with the youth peer supports in the nation's schools as well. So there's lots of opportunities and more work that we can do, and we look forward to working with you on it.
Let me just clarify when I say, because we're in the middle of this budget document, in which we did not deal with youth peer supports as an ad, and we added lots of things to what the governor started with. When I say I don't know, I mean that we need to find the money really to make it a designated line. Like each of these things, just so people understand, is an argument of what we need in addition to what the governor started with, or to subtract what she put in that we don't agree with. So every one of these is a fight, and I'm very prepared to fight for it, but we need to identify it as sort of a targeted funding line. Otherwise it gets mixed up and it does not get designated separately. So I appreciate what SED is doing, and I'm very supportive. It's not a line in this year's budget, and maybe it should be.
I'll take this opportunity to uplift that we do have a letter that we've drafted that would build at $5.5 million for family peer support providers and youth peer support providers. It's a relatively new thing that we are pushing for this year, and I don't think we were able to break through in any of the versions of the budget that we've seen. But we're really happy and really delighted to hear you say that. And we're happy to hear also, Assistant Commissioner, that this is something that you think is important. And we'll come back and we'll continue to figure out how we can get these programs funded.
Brad, I appreciate it. I just want people who are listening to understand. the advocacy translates into action. And when you're all together and your voices are heard, that's how we get to do these things like, getting funding for community schools, school lunch, after school, full day pre-K for 4-year-olds. All the things we added came from advocacy from the outside world, particularly from families. So I look forward to working with you on that.
Before we go to the next question, something I wanted to point out is that, we do a lot of work in education on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this idea that we want students to see themselves reflected in the material they study and in the curriculum. And I think that that peer advocate thing that you're talking about, Rebecca, is exactly that in the mental health world. Kids seeing themselves reflected through the emotional experience as well as the academic one. And I think that that's really empowering and helps kids feel less isolated, which is no small feat in the wake of COVID. So it's not something I knew about, and today I learned something too. So that was very cool. So thank you. I want to pass it over to Melinda Agnew now for her question.
Hold on, Shoshana. I hate to be annoying, but Rebecca, before we move on, is there anything you want to say in response to what you heard to your question?
I think you gave the perfect response, Brad. I'm just happy to see that this is something that is important and that you guys see it as important and that you're, ready and willing to get changes started to get this implemented. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Melinda Agnew, and I'm in Syracuse, New York. So it is often not the fault of students when they need to miss school. In the case of my family, mental health issues have prevented my children from participating in their education through no fault of their own. Excuse me. Not participating in their schooling and the lack of help to accommodate that has only compounded those issues. Gaps in education are a system-wide issue, ranging from teachers to social workers and administrators. What is the strategy for school systems to ensure that mental health treatment for students does not inhibit their education? And how will we hold them accountable to make sure that they are engaging their students?
Kathleen, you want to go first, or?
Sure. This is a really hard and great question, Melinda, and something we've struggled with. And we know that for many individuals, youth and adults, the pandemic has introduced so many stressors, and we're just seeing it play out in so many different ways. The department has recommended that schools monitor and address chronic absenteeism on an ongoing basis, and that they take a multi-tiered systems of support approach to connect with students and families and determine why a student has missed days of school, and inform families of the importance, of missing. So chronic absenteeism we define as having missed 10% of school days. And we recommend that you start counting that in September, right? So if you're supposed to be in schools for 20 days in September, then that's 2 days, and start looking for trends for those students and trying to work with the family to provide the supports needed so that those students can attend school. But as I said, it is, and I think those wraparound services that the senator talked about in those community schools is another great way, because we've really seen that, especially for our younger children, oftentimes it's family pressures that are keeping them from attending school, and schools are the hub. So let's have them access services right from the school. So I think that's wonderful. And thank you, Senator. I wanted to also let you know that in response to a lot of what we heard during the pandemic, that we have recently updated our regulations regarding home, hospital, and institutional instruction, which everybody used to call homebound, and I'm trying to get them to stop because it's really confusing. So it's home, hospital, or institutional instruction, and which is an educational service provided by a school district to resident students, both public and non-public, who are anticipated to be unable to attend school in person for at least 10 days in a 3-month period. 10 days in a 3-month period, not 10 days straight. It can be a couple days a month. And it can be due to physical, mental, or emotional illness or injury. And the instruction works to ensure that the students can continue learning and working towards mastery of learning standards while unable to attend school for a significant period of time. And so the changes in the regulations are in 100.22 and 175.21, but we have also frequently asked questions about these services on our website. But I also wanted to stress that as of July 1st, 2023, the hours of instruction will be increased to 10 hours of instruction per week. And this is supposed to be one-on-one tutoring for students, with some ability to have it, some of it be, virtual or remote instruction. So 10 hours a week at the elementary level and 15 hours of instruction per week at the secondary level, because we heard an awful lot about, families whose students could not attend school during the pandemic. And we recognized that what was being provided was not sufficient. So I hear you. Those are at least the positive steps we've taken so far.
I don't have too much to
Thank
add.
you.
Yeah, that's really good news to hear about, particularly for those kids who are unable to be in school, that you've modified the regs. We've seen that multiple times. And one other path that is very challenging, but sometimes I have to speak honestly about it, is pushing your Board of Education. At the end of the day, these folks have a lot of control over what happens between appointing the superintendent, setting policies, and being responsive to the public. And they're not easy to move, and we all know that, and they're not easy to confront. And they're particularly difficult when they sort of hold themselves out as separate and somehow apart from the parents and families they serve. But I know from my own experience and watching other districts that it takes some very assertive parents, and usually the parents of children with needs can be very assertive on behalf of their kids to get school boards to change, particularly if they're elected. So I'm not recommending anybody go, have a picket in front of the school board meeting, but there are ways to force attention to these issues, which frequently get sort of shifted to the superintendent, and the school boards do not always hear the impact of these decisions on individual families. So credit to you for being an advocate, and I hope these changes at SED will be helpful.
Thank you, Senator Mayer.
Melinda, do you have any follow-up before we go on?
No, Shoshana, thank you.
Okay, no problem. I really do. Oh, Kate, you've got your hand raised. Go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on the senator's point about school boards and remind everyone that parents can run for school board. We often are the strongest advocates on the school board. And we actually have a board member who's a young person who's running for school board in his district right now. He's a young person with lived experience and is hoping to make an impact with his voice on the school board.
And I just want to add, Paige, that I'm very interested in ensuring that school board members understand the full extent of their responsibility, not just the fiscal responsibility. They have other responsibilities, particularly in this time of pushback by some school board members against what we need to do. And it takes courage. So great that someone is running. Yes, parents should run. Parents who particularly want to make sure their voice of their family and their child is heard. It's we're going to push harder on this going forward, at least as long as I'm chair.
Thank you so much. Regarding school boards, I think that school boards have become some of the best reality TV you can see here in the state of New York the last year or two. But I think that they can be incredible vehicles for positive change. So, if you can find your people in your community, the folks who are standing with you in solidarity, whose kids may have similar issues, and show up as a group. And even if, not every one of you speaks, but you're sitting together as a body, I think that makes a really important point. And let's these elected officials know that they are accountable to us and to our children. So, I look forward to school boards being boring again someday soon, but it does not appear that today is that day. So
So
I'm going to pass it.
Shoshana, can I say
Yes.
one thing? Because
Yeah.
I presented to the New York State School Boards Association Board of Directors on Saturday morning in the middle of that snowstorm at 8:30 in the morning. I was not happy, but then I was really glad I went because I presented on the Safe Schools Task Force report, and they were surprised by the data, which, you know, really surprised me. And the research we presented, and there were some really committed folks who were saying, you know, what can we do? And I was like, you have so much power, right? You have so much power, you know, ask for your discipline data and ask for it disaggregated so you actually know what's going on in your schools. And, you know, you make decisions fiscally on what services are going to be provided. So are you providing sufficient dollars to support students? They were very receptive. So I think that they're, you know, I agree completely that it's a great opportunity to reach out and really talk to the school boards about what your students need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when school board members see you showing up regularly and paying attention, I think that you build those relationships with them. So I think that that's certainly something worth doing. And there, you know, for all of the reality TV, there are some good characters in there. So I want to pass it over to Jennifer, who is I believe one of our last questions of the day.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, Senator Mayor and Assistant Commissioner DeCataldo. I'm honored to be here to speak with you this afternoon. So my name is Jennifer Sibley. I have a degree in education, and I currently work as the Family Support Services Program Director at Northern Regional Center for Independent Living in the northern part of the state, Jefferson County. I've been able to use my experience as an educator and as a family peer advocate to provide training to parents on the special education process. I'm also the mother of a son on the autism spectrum who just graduated from high school last year, and he is transition age. My son worked with a transition team that included supports from school and from OPWDD. This team was able to look at my son's strengths and needs to help develop a transition plan that would set him up for success after graduation. My son was able to benefit from both my knowledge of what effective transition planning should look like and the school's willingness to support him through that journey. So my question for you today is, how can we ensure that transition services are not just an afterthought for students, but something that is built in, adhered to, and offered as a serious option for all students with disabilities?
Kathleen, you should go first on this again.
All right. Well, to begin, this is not my area of expertise. So when I saw this question, I reached out to my colleagues in special education and our Access VR offices for responses. And, you know, first of all, transition planning, it's required and integral part of a student with disabilities IEP. And beginning at age 15 or younger, if determined appropriate, each student's IEP is supposed to include transition-related components designed to help the student prepare for life after high school. And it's intended to be ongoing, collaborative, and requires a partnership with the student, family, and school district and other agencies. And I'm glad to hear OPWDD was part of your team, but really to help think about the activities as these students move from school to adult life. And the students should be, you know, integrally involved in the transition planning to the greatest extent possible. In addition, the transition components of a student with disabilities IEP, the commissioner's regulations require for all students in grades 6 through 12, including students with disabilities, that a certified school counselor provide an annual individual progress review plan, which reflects each student's educational progress and career plans. For a student with a disability, this plan must be consistent with the student's IEP. And I just tell you this so that you know where are the pressure points and questions that can be asked, right? And then appropriate transition planning and services. This whole area is really a priority for our Office of Special Education. And our recent blueprint for improved results for students with disabilities was developed to ensure that students with disabilities can benefit from high quality instruction and to reach the same standards as all our students. We have to annually report to the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Individuals with Disability, the percentage of youth with IEPs aged 15 and above with an IEP that includes required transition components. So that measure provides an accountability structure for the appropriate development of transition components in IEPs. Data from that measure also informs regional interagency discussions and planning. Our quality assurance unit in the Office of Special Education also ensures the correction of any identified non-compliance, and that changes are made to the district's policies, procedures, and practices when we learn that there are issues. The Office of Special Education's educational partnership, including the Technical Assistance Partnership for Transition at Cornell University. So there is a Technical Assistance Center specifically for transition planning, and their goals are to work with families and to be available for the families. So they are there and in addition, the Family and Community Engagement Centers to provide training and to support parents and students on appropriate transition plannings. In addition, I reached out to our Access VR office. So for students interested in employment, and I think sometimes these services get forgotten, our Office of Access VR is able to provide a variety of services. We have 25 district offices across the state, and counselors work with students referred by high schools. Ideally, Access VR starts working with students in their family as early as possible, and that could be 9th or 10th grade. We recognize that doesn't always happen, but families need to be aware that these offices are available and that they can push in to start to be providing supports and services as early as 9th and 10th grade. They provide, one of the services that they can provide is pre-employment transition services. And that group of services allows students with disabilities to explore career options, including job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, counseling on post-secondary options, workplace readiness training, and self-advocacy. So I think that there are resources out there. We need to work with you to get that information out to families better.
I just would add, Jennifer, I know particularly during COVID, I had a number of parents whose kids were in those transitional ages who felt that the district, while cognizant of their obligation, did not put the kind of energy into doing the right transition plan. And I think the Assistant Commissioner acknowledged it. This is a problem we have, particularly in districts. Two things that are if the person assigned to this is just not strong enough and willing to sort of do the fighting that's necessary on behalf of the child, you get left with a complacent attitude about this obligation, which is a real obligation to do this transition. And secondly, unless they have a parent like you who works and has knowledge, it is very challenging for some of these parents. And my concern always is, from a statewide perspective, there's a lot of parents who don't have a parent like those of us on this call today to advocate for them. And as a system, we have to do better for them. So I think it's helpful to get the information out that Kathleen referenced, and then to put pressure, as I have in a number of my districts, when the whole special ed operation within the district is too weak, is not strong enough on behalf of the kid, or is likely to give in to pressures about finance or money, or, there's a lot of other pressures on these people. And I don't think we do well enough in this area. I think we need to continue to put more both resources and energy in ensuring that transition is better. I would say I'm very happy that we have a new commissioner at OPWDD. It's one of the things the governor did right away. I was extremely dissatisfied with the prior commissioner's commitment to those with developmental disabilities. I think things are much improved, and we'll continue to build on that. But that shows why these state agencies really make a difference, who's at the top and what tone they set about the people they're responsible for.
I agree with you about the new OPWDD commissioner. I really appreciate her work, and thank you both for your responses.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful, wide-ranging discussion. I'm going to turn it back over to Paige.
Thanks, Shoshana. I just wanted to follow up with what Jennifer and the senator just said about the new OPWDD commissioner. We just had a developmental disabilities town hall last week, and she got asked a lot of questions about education because, as you can imagine, parents and young people who are involved in the DD system also are involved in special education and are often found that's where the challenges are. So she's gotten an earful from us already, and we consider her an ally as well. So I just wanted to say again, thank you so much to the assistant commissioner and to the senator for your time and your energy and your partnership as we continue to work together. We do view you both as allies, and we know that you're listening. You're listening to young people, you're listening to parents, and that's why we're here. That's why we have these town halls. That's why Families Together exists. Really, our motto is nothing about us without us. And we really want to make sure that the voices of people with lived experience are getting to the people who are making the policies that impact us. So we appreciate your ears and your partnership and your really thoughtful responses to our questions today, and all of the times that we've contacted you and worked with you over the years, and hope to continue to work with you to make the school systems and the systems in general more responsive to our young people and their families. And I want to remind everyone again about our Family Empowerment Day, which is Tuesday in the Legislative Office Building in what they call the Well. And we are really looking forward to seeing some legislators and families and young people who are going to do a rally and some speaking and have boxed lunches. So it's an all-day thing starting at around 10. The program starts at 12 with a rally following up at 11. So thank you again. And Brad, do you have anything else to add?
I see Senator Mayor's unmuted.
Because I'm putting that all those times on my calendar. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I was going to say, and I was wondering if you were going to say, we have invited Senator Mayor. I know that her staff had committed, and we really hope that you and others of your colleagues join us and talk about the Senate One House that you just passed and what that means for families and young people in the mental health system and behavioral health broadly. So thank you. We look forward to having you.
Thank you, Brad. I'll be there.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you on Tuesday.